The champagne flute slipped from my husband's fingers and shattered on the marble floor of the Fairmont Royal York's Grand Ballroom, sending a spray of Veuve Clicquot across the front row of Toronto's most influential philanthropists. 230 people fell silent. The string quartet stopped mid-note, and on the 14-foot projection screen behind the head table, the same screen I had personally arranged with the hotel's AV team 3 weeks ago, a text message from my husband's junior associate glowed in crisp white letters against a dark background. Can't stop thinking about last weekend at the cottage. When can we do it again? Miss you already. My husband's name was Daniel Whitmore. The associate was Natalie Park, and I was Claire Whitmore, the woman who had spent 6 months organizing the Heart and Stroke Foundation Gala down to the last floral arrangement, the woman sitting 12 feet away with her hands folded in her lap, watching her marriage end in high definition. 40 minutes earlier, I had been the perfect architect's wife. That's not my profession. Daniel is the architect, or rather he was a senior partner at Whitmore and Croft on Bay Street, the kind of firm whose name appeared on the lobby plaques of half the glass towers in the financial district. I had my own career, an interior design practice I'd built over 11 years, but on nights like this one I was expected to wear the navy gown, smile at the right people, and make sure Daniel's champagne glass was never empty. I was good at it. I had been good at it for 7 years. The gala was at the Fairmont Royal York on Front Street, and the room was exactly what I had envisioned when I took on the volunteer design role 18 months ago: warm amber lighting, ivory ranunculus centerpieces, a silent auction wall with framed photographs of the foundation's work in rural Ontario. The place cards were hand-lettered. The menu featured Ontario lamb. Daniel had told me 3 times that evening that everything looked beautiful, which I understood now was the kind of compliment that costs nothing and means less. He had been distracted since we arrived. I noticed it the way you notice a hairline crack in a wall. You're not sure when it appeared, but once you see it, you can't look away. He kept glancing at his phone beneath the table. He excused himself twice before the first course arrived. Once to take a call in the corridor, and once, he said, to check on the silent auction item he'd donated 2 nights at the cottage in Muskoka. I hadn't been to the cottage in 4 months. He'd been going alone, or so he told me, to decompress after the lakeshore development deal closed. I should say here that I wasn't suspicious that night. I want to be accurate about this because people will assume I was already planning what I did, and the truth is I wasn't. The truth is I went looking for Daniel's phone charger. He had left his jacket at our table when he went to greet someone at the bar, and I reached into the inside pocket to retrieve his MagSafe cable, which I knew he always carried, because his phone battery was perpetually dying. What I found instead was his phone, already unlocked. The screen lit with a notification from an iMessage thread labeled simply "no problem." I didn't mean to read it. I read every word. The thread went back 11 months. There were photographs I could not unsee. There were hotel bookings: the Hazelton in Yorkville, the Pillar and Post in Niagara-on-the-Lake on weekends when I had been in Vancouver visiting my sister or in Ottawa presenting at a design conference. There was a message from Daniel dated the previous February that read, "She's away until Thursday, come to the cottage Friday." The cottage I helped pay for. The cottage listed on the Heart and Stroke silent auction board 20 feet away. I sat very still for approximately 45 seconds. Then I put the phone back in his jacket pocket, excused myself to a woman named Brigitte from our Rosedale Neighborhood Association who was trying to tell me about a zoning dispute on Elm Avenue, and walked with what I hope was normal composure to the ladies' lounge near the East Corridor. I sat in the lounge for 6 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on my own phone. During those 6 minutes, I felt something strange happen: not panic, not tears, but a kind of arctic stillness that settled over me like the first hard freeze of November. I thought about the 11 months of messages. I thought about the Muskoka cottage. I thought about the fact that Daniel was, at this precise moment, preparing to give a speech in front of 230 people about the importance of community, partnership, and giving back. I thought about the fact that I had coordinated the AV system for this event personally. I still had the login credentials on my phone. I am not, by nature, an impulsive person. My practice is built on precision, on measured decisions, on understanding exactly how a space will function before a single wall goes up. What I did next was not impulsive. It was the most deliberate decision I have ever made. I pulled up the Bluetooth control panel for the presentation system, found the display queue, and connected my phone to the main screen. I had Natalie's message thread open, I selected the most recent exchange, the one from 4 days earlier, time-stamped last Sunday morning, the morning Daniel had told me he was playing golf at Scarborough Golf Club with clients. I selected the message that said, "Can't stop thinking about last weekend at the cottage. When can we do it again? Miss you already." And I set it to display on a 30-second delay. Then I walked back into the ballroom, smoothed the front of my gown, sat down, and picked up my champagne glass. Daniel took the microphone 40 seconds later. "I want to start by thanking everyone here tonight," he said, his voice carrying the easy authority of a man accustomed to being listened to. "The Heart and Stroke Foundation does extraordinary work, and events like this one don't happen without an enormous amount of dedication behind the scenes." He paused, the way he always paused before a line he was proud of. "And I have to say, my wife Claire deserves enormous credit for everything you see in this room tonight." The screen behind him changed. I watched his face rather than the screen. I watched the exact moment he registered that something was wrong, a slight shift in the audience's expression, a ripple of murmuring starting at the front left table where Justice Carmichael and his wife were seated. Daniel turned. The rest is the part people saw on Twitter within 40 minutes. His champagne glass hit the floor. His face drained of color in real time. Someone near the back said, loudly enough to carry, "Oh my God." His business partner Marcus, seated 2 tables to my left, made a sound I will describe only as strangled. I stood up slowly. I set my champagne glass on the table with both hands. "I believe," I said, in a voice I did not entirely recognize as my own, "that Natalie has already scheduled your Sunday." I picked up my clutch and walked out of the ballroom. I made it to the lobby before I stopped walking. I stood near the bellhop stand under the chandelier and breathed carefully, the way my therapist had taught me years ago for anxiety, 4 counts in and 4 counts out. It did not particularly help. The marble floor of the Fairmont lobby is very cold-looking even when it isn't cold, and I stared at it and breathed and tried to understand that my life had just changed irrevocably in a room 30 meters behind me. The first person to come after me was not Daniel. It was Sandra Bellamy, who had been my closest friend since we met in our daughter's kindergarten class at Deer Park Public School. Sandra, who organized our annual cottage trip every August and who had sat next to me at my father's funeral and who had been at every birthday dinner for 7 years. Sandra, who appeared in the lobby in her red dress with her hands clasped in front of her and an expression on her face that I recognized, with a long and terrible delay, as guilt. "Claire." She reached for my arm and I stepped back without thinking. "How long?" I said. She looked at the floor. "I only found out recently. Marcus mentioned something in passing and I didn't know how to." "How long, Sandra?" "Since the spring." She looked up. "April, I think." Marcus knew before that. He said Daniel swore it was nothing, that it was already over. So It wasn't over, I said. "It is still very much not over. There are 11 months of messages, Sandra. There are hotel receipts." I stopped because my voice was doing something I didn't want it to do. "Every time you asked me about our anniversary plans, every time you asked how things were with Daniel, you knew. We didn't want to interfere in your marriage. You interfered," I said, "by staying quiet. That's still a choice." I left her standing by the bellhop stand and pushed through the revolving door onto Front Street. The February air was brutal, -18 with wind chill, and I was in a gown with no coat. I stood on the sidewalk and felt the cold like a correction, something that made sense when nothing else did. My phone was ringing. "Daniel." I declined it. My phone rang again. My mother-in-law, Patricia Whitmore, calling from Oakville. I declined that too. The third call was from a number I didn't recognize, and I answered it because I needed something different to think about. "Mrs. Whitmore? This is Priya Anand. I'm a reporter with the Globe and Mail. I was at tonight's event, and I wanted to reach out." "I'm not speaking to press," I said. "Not tonight. I understand. But I want you to know that what happened in there this isn't the first time I've heard the name Natalie Park in connection with your husband's firm." She paused. "I've been looking into Whitmore and Croft for about 3 months. If you'd like to talk at some point, here's my number." She gave me the number. I memorized it the way I memorize measurements automatically, without effort. A cab pulled up to the Fairmont entrance and I got in before the doorman could flag someone else. I gave my home address in Rosedale, then changed my mind 2 blocks later and gave my sister-in-law Catherine's address in the annex instead. Catherine was Daniel's younger sister and the only member of his family I had ever genuinely liked, and I needed someone who wouldn't immediately call Patricia Whitmore. Catherine opened her door in pajamas and took one look at me and said, "Get inside right now." I told her everything over tea at her kitchen table. She listened without interrupting, which is something very few people do well and Catherine does exceptionally. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "I have to tell you something," she said finally. "And I need you to know that I am telling you because I love you and because you deserve to know, not because I'm choosing a side." "Tell me." "At Christmas. Mom and Dad's house in Oakville." She wrapped both hands around her mug. "I heard Dad and Daniel talking in the study. I only caught part of it, something about a timeline and Daniel saying after the Lakeshore deal closes, the numbers work out better. I didn't understand what they were talking about and I told myself it was about the business." She looked at me. "I think it wasn't about the business." I drove back to Rosedale at 1 in the morning. Daniel's car was in the driveway. Every light in the house was on. I sat in the cab for 45 seconds and then paid the driver and went inside. He was in the kitchen, still in his tuxedo with the tie loosened. His posture the posture of a man who has been rehearsing a conversation for hours. He started talking before I had taken off my coat. "What you did tonight was unhinged," he said. "Do you understand the damage you've caused?" The Lakeshore investors were in that room. The foundation board. Marcus is fielding calls, the firm is. "Is Natalie Park the only one?" I said. He stopped. "I'm asking you a direct question," I said. "Is she the only one?" Something shifted in his face. "Claire, this is not the conversation to have right now." "Then I'll find out another way." I went upstairs to his home office, which was locked, which it had not been 6 months ago. The lock was a standard interior lever with a privacy button. I used a coin to open it in 30 seconds. I am an interior designer. I know exactly how every door in my house works. His laptop was open on the desk. The screen locked, but the password was our alarm system code, which I had set and which he had never bothered to change. Inside his documents folder, in a subfolder labeled Legal, Lakeshore, was a second subfolder labeled with the law firm's name. I opened it. It took me 25 minutes to understand what I was reading. Then it took me 5 minutes to understand it more deeply than I wanted to. Daniel had retained a family law firm in November 3 months ago. The preliminary strategy documents were meticulous. They outlined an approach to separation that would characterize me as financially dependent on his income in a way that was deliberately misleading. My design practice operates through a numbered corporation, and the corporate income was structured to appear minimal by comparison to his salary. There were notes about the matrimonial home, about the Muskoka property. There was a line in a bullet point beneath a heading I will not forget, that read, "Subject's primary professional network derives from Whitmore and Croft referrals. Interrupting this pipeline may motivate settlement compliance." He had been planning to use my livelihood as leverage. He had been building the case for 4 months while I sat across from him at dinner and talked about tile samples and client meetings and whether we should renovate the back garden. There was a second document, an email chain with his father, Gerald Whitmore, retired commercial developer, Oakville Golf and Country Club member, man who had given a toast at our wedding about the importance of trust. The email chain discussed timing. It discussed the Lakeshore deal and when it would close. It discussed the division of a property in Prince Edward County that I had not known. Daniel owned a farmhouse, purchased through a numbered company 18 months ago. My father-in-law had known. He had been advising on the financial structuring. I sat in Daniel's office for a long time. Then I took photographs of every document on the screen, forwarded them to a private email account I created on my phone, and went downstairs. Daniel was still in the kitchen, now with a glass of scotch. "I have spoken to my attorney," he said, which was not true. It was 2 in the morning, but I let him have it. "We are going to handle this like adults. You made a scene tonight that cannot be undone, but we can still manage the narrative if we move carefully. You have a farmhouse in Prince Edward County," I said. He set down his scotch. "In a numbered company registered in November of last year," I said. "The same month you retained McAllister Family Law." The sound in the kitchen was the particular sound of a careful plan collapsing faster than its architect anticipated. "The Lakeshore deal," I continued, "closes in 6 weeks, which is, I notice, when your legal documents suggest you intended to initiate proceedings. I wasn't leaving on your terms, Daniel. I was being discarded on your schedule." He recovered faster than I expected. You've been going through my files. You've been going through my life. He took a step toward me and his voice dropped into the controlled register I recognized from difficult client calls, the voice he used when he wanted to sound reasonable and wasn't. Everything we have, I built. Your firm runs on introductions I made. Your clients are people I know. You want to blow this up? Fine. But understand what you're walking away from. Because nobody is going to hire the woman who had a meltdown at a charity gala and destroyed her husband's career. I didn't destroy anything, I said. I just showed everyone what was already there. I called a locksmith at 7 the next morning. By 9, the door codes were changed and a new deadbolt was installed on the front door. Daniel had left sometime before dawn to the Hazelton, I assumed, where he and Natalie apparently had a preferred rate. The locksmith, a man in his 50s with a Tim Hortons cup, said without being asked, saw something about a gala on Twitter last night. You doing okay? I will be, I said. I retained a family law attorney named Deborah Kwan before noon. Deborah is known in Toronto legal circles with the kind of blunt affection that comes from watching someone systematically take apart opposing counsel. Her assistant told me she had been expecting my call. Deborah herself told me, when I sat across from her in her office on Richmond Street West with my photographs and my forwarded emails, that the Prince Edward County property was the most useful thing I could have found. Undisclosed marital asset, she said, making a note. And the numbered company predates your separation date by a year and a half. That's going to be interesting for his side to explain. There's also a referral network question, I said, and explained what his legal documents had outlined about my client pipeline. I want to protect my practice. We will protect your practice, Deborah said. Send me everything you have tonight. The social fallout was faster and then stranger than I expected. By Monday morning, my phone had received 41 messages. Roughly a third were expressions of genuine support, a third were awkward silence disguised as wellness checking, and a third were the specific kind of absence that tells you exactly who someone is. 3 clients with Whitmore and Croft connections canceled projects. 2 others who I had worked with independently sent messages saying they had seen the news and wanted to continue regardless. The Rosedale Neighborhood Association sent a diplomatically worded note asking if I would like to take a temporary leave from the Communications Committee, given current circumstances. The Globe and Mail piece ran on the Wednesday. Priya Anand had been thorough. Her investigation into Whitmore and Croft focused not on my marriage but on the firm's employment practices specifically, a pattern involving junior female associates over a period of 6 years, 3 of whom had left the firm with severance agreements and confidentiality clauses, and 1 of whom had filed a human rights complaint that was settled quietly through the firm's insurance. Daniel was not the only named partner with concerns. Marcus was implicated peripherally in a supervisory failure. The Ontario Securities Commission had separately opened a file related to the Lakeshore development deal and undisclosed conflicts of interest. I read the piece at my kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, and felt something I can only describe as clarity, the particular clarity that comes not from resolution but from finally seeing the whole shape of a thing. My mother called that afternoon. I answered. She said, I saw the article. I want to say something and I need you to let me finish before you respond. Go ahead, I said. Your father and I always had concerns about Daniel. Not specific concerns, nothing we could point to. But the way he framed things. The way he talked about your career as though it were a hobby. We didn't say anything because you were happy, or you seemed happy, and we thought it wasn't our place. A pause. That was wrong. It was our place and we should have said it. My mother is not someone who apologizes easily. I understood what the call had cost her. Thank you for saying that, I said. Are you all right? I'm getting there, I said, which was more honest than the alternative. The message from Natalie Park came on a Thursday evening, 3 weeks after the gala, to an email address she found through my firm's website. It was brief. It said she had read the Globe piece and that there were things I didn't know, and that she would understand if I didn't want to hear them, but that she was willing to talk if I was willing to listen. We met at a cafe on Bloor Street near Spadina. She was younger than I had imagined, 27, and she looked like someone who had been running on very little sleep for a long time. She ordered a tea and held the cup with both hands and did not look like a woman who had been conducting a willing affair. I need you to know that I didn't pursue him, she said. I know you have no reason to believe that. Tell me what happened. She told me. It took 40 minutes. The version she described was different from the narrative I had constructed in my head over the past 3 weeks, different in ways that made me very still and very cold again. Not with anger this time, but with something more like recognition. Daniel had been her supervising partner. The progression from professional pressure to personal coercion had been gradual enough that she hadn't identified it clearly until she was already inside it. When she tried to disengage, he reminded her that her visa status was connected to her employment and that a negative performance review from a senior partner could affect her path to permanent residency. She slid a USB drive across the table. "Voice memos," she said. "I started recording about 8 months ago because I needed to know I wasn't imagining it." I looked at the drive for a moment. "Why are you giving this to me?" "Because I want it to be used," she said. "And because I'm sorry." Not for the right reasons at first. At first I was sorry because I got caught. And that's not a real apology. But I've had 3 weeks to think about it, and I'm sorry because you didn't deserve any of it, and I should have found another way out much sooner. "You should have," I said. "And you're also not the one who created the situation." I gave the drive to Deborah that same afternoon. 6 months after the gala, Deborah finalized a divorce settlement that included the matrimonial home, a fair division of assets including the Prince Edward County property that Daniel had attempted to exclude, and a spousal support arrangement that would give my practice the runway it needed to rebuild its client base independently. The human rights matter involving the junior associates resulted in a formal settlement with the Law Society of Ontario involved. Daniel's partnership was terminated by the firm's remaining partners before the Lakeshore deal could close, a development that his own legal strategy had not anticipated and could not fully survive. The OSC matter was ongoing as of the day my divorce was finalized, and Deborah described the firm's position in those proceedings with a single word: complicated. I heard through Catherine, who remains one of my closest people, that Patricia and Gerald Whitmore had relocated to their Florida property for the winter and were not expected back until spring. I did not find this surprising. On the day the divorce was finalized, I went to the cottage in Muskoka. This requires explanation. The cottage was part of the settlement. It came to me, along with enough in the division to manage the carrying costs for a year while I decided what to do with it. I drove up on a Thursday in August, alone, 4 hours north on the 400 and then east on the smaller roads where the granite starts to push up through the earth and the trees close in over the highway and Lake Muskoka appears between the tree line like something you weren't sure you'd find. I had spent 6 summers at that cottage telling myself I was happy. I had cooked dinners on that dock. I had watched sunsets from that deck in a marriage I thought was one thing and that turned out to be something else entirely, a transaction. Daniel had almost said as much. A calculation about connection and convenience that I had mistaken for love. I sat on the dock for a long time. I was not planning to keep the cottage. I had a buyer lined up, a young family from Ottawa, and the sale would close in September. What I was doing at the dock was not sentimental. I was looking at a place that had been part of a story I'd been told about my own life, a story I had accepted and decorated and maintained and tried to perfect, and I was trying to understand what it meant to let that story go. The water was very still. It smelled like August in Ontario, warm granite and pine and something green underneath. A loon called somewhere across the bay. What I had built since February was smaller than what I had lost and also more entirely mine. My practice had 6 active projects, all of them sourced independently. I had hired a second designer, a recent graduate from OCAD who was extraordinary. I had joined the board of a women's business mentorship organization that Sandra, the real Sandra, not the one who had stayed quiet for months, had suggested I look into, and I had found in that work a purpose I hadn't known I was missing. Priya Anand had become a source of news I actually trusted and something close to a friend. I had also, slowly, been learning what I actually wanted. Not what I was supposed to want. Not what completed the picture of a life that photographed well at galas and charity events and neighborhood dinners. What I wanted genuinely, specifically, mine. I wanted the cottage gone. I wanted the new project in Cabbagetown that I'd taken on alone to be finished well. I wanted more mornings like this one, quiet and cold-aired and honest, with no performance required and no one watching. My phone sat on the dock beside me. I looked at it and thought about the night at the Fairmont, about the 14-foot screen and Daniel's champagne glass and the sound of 230 people going suddenly silent. People had called it a meltdown. His attorneys had called it a campaign. Priya had called it, in her piece, a very precise decision made in a very pressured moment. That was closest to accurate. The loon called again. I picked up my coffee and watched the mist burn off the far end of the lake and thought about precision, about knowing exactly what you are building before you begin. About understanding how a space will function. About the difference between a wall and a load-bearing wall, and why it matters which one you're taking down. I had taken down a load-bearing wall. As it turned out, the house had needed to come down anyway. What I was building in its place was going to take longer. And it was going to be smaller. And every beam in it would be one I had chosen myself. I thought that was probably enough.